And what is up, everybody? This is Darren talking, and for those of you who have been listening to bjpenn.com, watching UFC, anything inside MMA, anything posted on Facebook about mixed martial arts, you should all know that UFC is about to have a very, very difficult start, and possibly all year round, for 2015. They already ended the year on a bad note with the signing of CM Punk, the signing of Reebok to do their official UFC uniform, and this lawsuit that they got going on between a few fighters and, of course, UFC. We'll start with CM Punk. There's a lot of haters, fans and fighters alike, not happy that CM Punk is signed with UFC, and I'm not mad. He wants to make make a name for himself in mixed martial arts. Go right ahead. I don't have a problem with it. You're lucky enough to get started in the number one organization. Go right ahead. Brock Lesnar's second fight was in UFC, and they put him up against Frank Mir. But for him to liken himself, or for anybody to really liken him to Brock Lesnar, is ridiculous. Brock Lesnar was a collegiate wrestler. Brock Lesnar, clearly, how many times, what is it? Division I wrestler. It's I don't know how many times, winning national championships, state championships, and stuff like that. And from what I understand, CM Punk has never really competed in any form of combat sport. Nothing big, anyway. So to my knowledge, him coming off of pro wrestling into that, not the same as Brock Lesnar. Clearly not the same as Brock Lesnar. Then, so many people are mad. I'm mad, but not because he signed with UFC and because I think he can't do well. I'm mad because he was supposed to fight Jason David Frank. Jason David Frank, I'm pretty sure, is mad that this isn't happening. Jason David Frank and him, I don't know what convention the two of them were at, or like Fan Expo or something, that they basically said, yeah, I'm going to be cool if the two of them fought. Because Jason David Frank, like I said before, isn't going to fight unless he gets somebody worth fighting. And CM Punk, granted, never fought in mixed martial arts before, but still a pretty big name, which means a pretty big payday. But Jason David Frank won't sign with UFC. He said, he won't, if he was really going to make a career out of it, he wasn't going to sign with UFC because if you sign with UFC, UFC owns you. That's it. So, as far as him teaching, as far as the work that he does with Bat in the Sun, the independent YouTube channel, they do some great geek stuff. This series that he has his reality show, as well as a series they got coming out, Taz Kaden, Operation Black Unicorn, and obviously the man does a lot of fan service, going to conventions and all these other different things that he just goes out of his way for. If he signs with UFC, that's all over. Not to mention the fact that he started the clothing line Jesus Didn't Tap. Now, thanks to the new uniform deal with Reebok, he can't even wear his own clothing line. What the hell sense does that make? He tried signing with World Series of Fighting. Granted, nowhere near as big as UFC, but a big name, a big venue, could have made a lot of money with it. Okay, great. And what does CM Punk do? Signs with UFC. Then in all the interviews and all the posts that he's doing, does not even mention Jason David Frank. Doesn't say maybe you could fight in the near future, because UFC already signed CM Punk's first opponent, and it's not Jason David Frank. he could have tried convincing Dana White. He was like, listen, you should sign Jason David Frank. Obviously, he's a good fighter. He's got a huge fan base. So anytime, so guaranteed, anybody who steps up, you're bound to make a lot of money with him. Plus, this is something the two of us agreed upon. Then on top of that, for him to say, okay, like, oh yeah, I'll fight him I'll fight him in the near future. Let's say I get my feet wet with this first guy, and then work my way up to JDF. No, he doesn't. He's not even trying to say anything remotely like that. And that's what's more infuriating to me. Not the fact that it's a pro wrestler, because there's been several successful pro wrestlers in mixed martial arts. Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was a professional wrestler before he got selected to come into King of Pancrase, to which he dominated. Then, of course, UFC, which was no holds barred competition at the time, and then, of course, back into pro wrestling with WWE. He could probably do pro wrestling. He could probably still do pro wrestling now and do pretty good. Brock Lesnar. Enough said. Bobby Lashley. Also, great mixed martial artist, came out of pro wrestling. Another collegiate wrestler and former Army Ranger. Kazushi Sakuraba, the Gracie Killer. That's right. The man was a pro wrestler before he got into mixed martial arts. There's a majority. As a matter of fact, a majority of the fighters from Pride, the Japanese fighters, were all pro wrestlers. When Pride first started, a majority of them were all pro wrestlers before they got into it, and a lot of them made some pretty big names for themselves. Then, Phil CM Punk Brooks, got no problem with you fighting in UFC. My problem is that you are CM Punking out against the guy you were supposed to fight. That's right. Then there's lawsuits that they got going on. I don't know how, it's for millions of dollars. I don't know what the deal is, but apparently, granted, you can't keep everybody happy, and I've said this on several occasions, how basically you have to do what's best for the company. As far as with someone like Quentin Jackson. Quentin Jackson, he was losing a lot, so they let him go. Didn't re-sign him. But then you got somebody like Mark Hunt, who was losing a lot before he got into UFC. Okay, he was losing a bunch before he even got into UFC. But unfortunately, they still had a contract with him. They wanted to pay him out. He said, "No, I'll fight." So they didn't have a choice. And what happens? He just loses his first fight, then explodes all over the UFC. Now they have to renegotiate a contract with him. Kung Lei didn't necessarily do too well in UFC, but you know what? He didn't have to come to UFC. He didn't have to come to mixed martial arts in general. The man was already a legend. For him to win the Strikeforce middleweight title when it was actually worth something, okay, great. Breaking Frank Shamrock's arm, towards more or less the end of his career. Now, I feel like Frank Shamrock should have been able to take on a couple more fights maybe before finally retiring, but he made his decision. He doesn't want to be more or less like his brother Ken, who can't win a fight now, and a bunch of other guys like Phil Baroni. I feel so bad for Phil Baroni, but for someone like Kung Lei to win the Strikeforce title, I feel bad that he relinquished the title to make a bunch of absolutely garbage movies. To come back, explode back onto Strikeforce, come into UFC and not do very well. He beat Patrick Cote. Which I thought Patrick Cote got robbed, but he really needed that victory, and he knocked out former middleweight champion Rich Franklin. Okay, good on you. That would have that was a tough fight, but you were never gonna win that middleweight belt. It just wasn't gonna happen. You already turned 40. You got nothing else to prove. You've done enough in the martial arts world. You got nothing else to prove. But at the same time, if this is money that was promised to them, money that they were supposed to get, they didn't get it yet. This was fights that they had to get paid out for, and UFC's not doing it. I hope UFC pays every cent of it because, like I said, I agree with Dana White to a point. I agree with him to a point because he does he does play favorites. He absolutely plays favorites. I mean, look at him with Matt Lindland. Matt Lindland for years was the number one 185 pounder in the world. Even when Anderson Silva had the belt for as long as he did, when he first got the belt, Matt Lindland was considered number 185 pounder in the world. And the man never won a world title. How does that work exactly? And he just didn't think him very marketable. He didn't have the look of a fighter. He wasn't a very exciting fighter, but he won all his fights. He was a naturally tough dude. And especially because of his wrestling ability, I knew this for a fact. Because of his wrestling ability, Anderson Silva, who the biggest hole in his game was wrestling. Somebody like Matt Lindland would have been able to exploit it and definitely drop some serious bombs on him. Yes, you have like so many different opportunities for these guys to to really showcase themselves, and some of them do. Others, unfortunately, fizzle out almost as quickly as they come, and but some of them aren't really given their chance, even though they're promised it. And whatever money that is deserved to these guys, I hope they get. I really do. With the amount of money that's going on, and the fact that not too many people are happy, not too many people on the business end are happy with UFC due to the fact that, like I said, they're the number one organization, but they make it so that they take control of everything, which I don't agree with. Prime example, the UFC uniform deal with Reebok. How many years has Tap Out been in UFC's corner? And they're going to sign with Reebok. Tap Out was the first MMA clothing line. They signed with Reebok. Tap Out made your Ultimate Fighter uniforms for season 10 and a bunch of seasons after that. You're signing with Reebok. You signed with Reebok. Jesus Didn't Tap Out, Warrior Wear, Hayabusa, Title, Rev Gear, Bad Boy. The list goes on and on. Of all these different companies that have sponsored UFC fighters, endorsed UFC's fighters for years, for well over a decade. Some of these companies, and you're signing with Reebok, and Reebok, there's not going to be room for anybody else or anything else. So no Toyo tires, no Zions, no Condom Depot I used to see a lot, no Full Tilt Poker, no, just Reebok. That's it. They get one check as opposed to the 50 that they would normally get from all these endorsements, which would probably be maybe five-figure deals, which is decent due to the fact that you don't pay these fighters enough anyway. Pro boxers get paid $20 million just for the fight. That's not even including all their endorsements. No, you're gonna sign with Reebok, and people can only wear Reebok. And of course, your champions, your two posted children, Ronda Rousey and John Jones. Of course they're glad because they're probably getting more money. which probably makes up, for all the money that they lost from all their endorsements. But keep in mind, Greg Jackson also makes a lot of money off of endorsements. He's losing a lot of money because because they have to wear Reebok. So it's just ridiculous. I mean, Century makes your gloves. Before that it was Anwar. Before that it was Boxogenic. And before that, when there was no gloves, the only gloves that people would wear were either the Century wrist wrap gloves, which were designed by Chuck Norris, or the Harbinger knockoffs, which were very, very, very good. Very, very good leather. Very good wrist support and all that. But it's dumb. It's absolutely dumb. I mean, you had your own. UFC's been producing its own clothes, its training shorts, its rash guards, its gloves, its shin pads, and all this other different gear that they've been doing for a long time. All on their own. For that way, if a fighter doesn't have any endorsements, doesn't have a sponsor, at least he got some clothes to show up to fight in. Okay, great. But for you to sign with Reebok, and for it to be Reebok and nobody else, that's not fair. That's not fair. That means a majority of the people, like Everlast got to go. None of your fighters could show up in these catalogs or anything like that. And Tap Out, seriously, you're screwing over Tap Out after everything that Tap Out has done for the sport of mixed martial arts. I honest to God don't think that mixed martial arts would be what it is today if not for Tap Out, because that was a clothing line for a sport that nobody believed in. But thanks to both mixed martial arts and Tap Out, UFC is known. Thanks to UFC and Tap Out, that mixed martial arts is known worldwide. And you're signing with Reebok. Reebok, who, I mean, where the hell were they during the dark times? They pretty much wanted nothing to do. Now because they want to do something new, and because it seems like you basically, the Petito brothers just want more control over their fighters. Now, keep in mind, like, I understand Dana White. I agree with some of the stuff he does. Like, prime example, he doesn't pay the managers. He does not pay the managers. He pays the fighters, and whatever the managers cut, let the fighter worry about that. Because manager will say, "Oh yeah, pay me. Pay me. I get paid first. Give me the check, and then wind up ripping his client off," which is something that apparently a lot of boxing managers do. So for Dana White, who used to be a pro boxer, never necessarily made it. He understands the fight business better than anybody, which is why all these other guys was like, "Oh yeah, we'll do all these other promotions, start all these other promotions," which is why a majority of them keep losing. But at the same time, you're giving these people no freedom. I mean, how many of the people there actually use Reebok to train for anything? I think the only one that ever did was Rampage, and you let him go. Rampage was the only one I know of that signed a deal with Reebok, and you let him go. There was those ridiculously those ugly sole shoes, and it was ridiculous. Lorenzo, Frank, Dana, this is going to be a very, very tough year for you. You're making a lot of fighters unhappy. You're making a lot of fans unhappy, and you'll probably survive the year. But if you really want to make You really want to make people happy? Sign Jason David Frank. Let go of this ridiculous. Get rid of this ridiculous Reebok deal, and for the most part, pay your fighters. If you do that, guaranteed 2016 will be a lot more profitable for you. I don't know why you're signing the deal with Reebok anyway. I mean, regardless of how many endorsements that people get, that's money you don't have to pay, that you don't have to worry about, because you're not the one paying. But if it's just more money in your pocket, as opposed to fighters being able to take care of themselves and their families, shame on you. You got no business doing that. I'm done talking. You guys have a good night.